If you come along to a lot of my talks, you'll realize that I like to start off by telling a story to begin with. This story is more often than not a story about a mistake that I made as a leader. I do this for a couple of reasons. The first reason is research shows that if I demonstrate to you why this topic is meaningful for me, you'll understand why it can be meaningful for you. The other reason is because research also shows that the more the person on front of the stage makes a fool of themselves, the higher you guys vote the talk in all the surveys. And I want to come back next time. So I'll start off with a story. So like was said in my intro, I got into tech leadership really, really early. By the time I was 24 years old, I was running a team of 10 people. I do not say that to say, wow, aren't I awesome? Because the exact opposite is true. What 24-year-old knows how to be an employee and a professional, let alone a leader? And so I made a bunch of mistakes. One of them was around this topic of conflict. So I was, 25, 26 years old. There was me, the tech lead, there was a senior engineer, and there was a mid-level engineer, so the three of us. And we were having a debate about how to build a particular piece of software. And there's me and there's the senior, we're really getting into it, ideas are flowing back and forward, and a passionate discourse on whether we should build it this way or that way, whether we should use RabbitMQ or do something ourselves, and all these really intense discussions. After I had those discussions, I realized that the junior engineer hadn't said anything during that entire 10-minute, 15-minute, whatever it was, discussion. And being the young tech leader that I was, I looked at that situation and went, oh, perfect. This is a great opportunity for me to teach that person the value of assertiveness. That was not the right choice. What I'd actually done was I was not realizing that I was in conflict. I was happy with this discussion. This felt like a really great discussion. But the junior was not. And the junior was feeling a conflict that I didn't feel. And looking back on that with 15 years of experience, I can kind of see the mistakes that I made. And so when I came to kind of starting to think about this talk and put it together, that story kept running through my mind. The fact that there are different types of conflict. Conflict is not always bad. But if that's the case, then what's the difference? What was the difference between the conflict that me and the senior were having and the conflict that we were having with the junior? Because it was the same conversation. How can there be two different conflicts going on? And why can one of them be good, because we get a great outcome, and one of them be bad because somebody isn't involved? So this story was circling around my mind again and again. So I'm going to dive into that today. We're going to dive into what is the difference between healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, how you can recognize the two of them, how you can move an unhealthy conflict to a healthy conflict, and why we shouldn't be striving to eradicate all conflict, but only the unhealthy type. So that pretty much will start off with what is the difference, why we should do it, and then how do you move towards it. Hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end as well. I don't like to stand up here for 30 minutes and talk at you. The fact is that you come to these things not just because you want to know something different, but because you want to do something different. You come to this not just for knowledge acquisition, but for behavior change. And the difference between knowledge acquisition and behavior change is you contextualizing it for yourself, you trying to apply it to your day-to-day. So I don't want you to sit here for 30 minutes looking at me. I want you to engage, ask questions, and interrupt me. I am not going to be upset if anybody puts their hand up at any point during this and asks a question. In fact, I'm regularly going to turn it to you and ask you a question. You're probably also wondering who I am and what's this weird Englishman doing here. So I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens. And I'm a short-term father of a flock of humans, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love travel. I love getting around the world. I love seeing things, which is why I've ended up in Australia. Pre-COVID, I had a goal of visiting 2 new countries every single year. And I met that goal from my early 20s to COVID. Sounds amazing when you grow up in Australia. If you grow up in Europe, visiting 2 countries is basically just driving in a circle. It's really not that hard. I'm back on track with that. So 2023, I visited 4 new countries. So I'm hoping I can continue that trend this year. I've already booked a trip to Hong Kong and China this year. So we'll see. Hopefully I can catch up on COVID. From a professional point of view, I started life as a cold fusion developer. Anybody ever done cold fusion? Yeah. XML-based programming language. Ooh, square bracket if. Awful. I didn't let that hold me back, and so I became a Visual Basic developer. Anybody a VB developer? Yep. I didn't let that hold me back, and so I became a PHP developer. There's some oohs on that one. It's not as contentious. But I also got into tech leadership early and have spent the past kind of decade and a half learning to be better, and the past sort of 6 years or so kind of turning that back and teaching those skills. I realized that the bits of my job I enjoyed the most was the teaching, the training, the coaching, and so I wanted to turn that into my day job. And now that's what I do. I teach, I train, I coach, and I build an online platform that helps tech leaders be better at their jobs. So I told you I was going to turn this back at you and I was going to get you to engage. This is the first of those. What can cause conflict? Yep.
Talking to your point about the juniors and stuff like that, is that the different levels of understanding of a particular problem can cause a lot of conflict because you got, like, say 2 higher level engineers speaking about a problem, and a junior falling behind, not understanding the technical jargon that basically those seniors have used, and it causes conflict, causes divide.
Yeah. When you've got somebody who maybe doesn't have the terminology, the understanding, the domain expertise, the technical expertise, that can kind of lead to a bit of conflict, definitely. Anybody else? I think rather than running there with a microphone, I'll maybe just repeat it. Oh no, you're happy to do it. Okay, cool. Go for it.
Different appetites for risk?
Yeah, definitely. Nobody's ever said that. I've done this talk about 7 or 8 times. Nobody's said that. That's an awesome answer. Thank you.
Differing priorities?
Yeah, different priorities, different goals. That's often, you can often have entirely different goals.
Coding styles that haven't been defined.
Yeah, tabs versus spaces. That causes a lot of conflicts. Last one? Yeah, different ideas, definitely.
Ego, you don't want to lose.
Oh, yeah, ego, face, the idea that, this idea, I put a lot of myself into this idea, and if this idea loses, I lose. We're going to talk a lot about that. That's a really, really big thing. So I wanted to put a few of these up there. So, we talked about debating languages, choosing a design pattern, code reviews, things also, working style and communication preferences. Knowledge hoarding is another one. This is kind of the idea that as the value that I provide to my team is the information that I hold in my head. This is sometimes called mortgage-driven development. It's basically the idea that, if I know this thing and you don't, my job is secure and yours isn't. This is bad. Do not do it. Something else is, build versus buy. Should we build this thing ourselves? Should we buy a platform to do it? Obviously, I spend a lot of time with tech leaders. Denying promotions is a big one. Obviously, that's a really difficult, tricky thing for a leader to do, and it's tricky for the other person to be involved in that. So if these are conflicts, and some of these, we want to have these discussions on build versus buy. We want to have these discussions on how we build something. So if we're going to do them, how do we do them in the right way? How do we have healthy conflict as opposed to unhealthy conflict? What's the difference between these? Anybody want to take a stab at a guess?
Get my exercise in. Respecting others' opinions and personalities.
Ooh. What does respecting other people's opinions look like? That's a principle. What's the behavior exhibited because of that?
What does it look like? acknowledging, listening, those sort of things.
Yep.
Discussing their perspective, I guess.
Yeah, like sometimes trying to strongman their argument, or steelman rather. You know, often if we're having an argument with somebody, has anybody heard the term straw man? You know, you try and dismiss their argument, but it's not actually their argument. It's a made-up version of their argument that has less power. The kind of opposite of that is steelmanning. And if you cannot steelman somebody else's argument, you don't actually understand their argument. If you can't make their points for them and understand their points, you don't understand their points. Cool. Anybody else?
I guess healthy conflict would be like seeking to understand before being understood.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, asking questions, asking somebody to give their point of view, and then Michelle, just because you started.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to say it's how people feel about it afterwards, I think.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
If it's unhealthy conflict, people will probably be upset, distressed, angry, grinding their teeth, bitching. Whereas if it's healthy, it'll be like, well, we got through that, all right, great, let's go, do the thing.
So it's the difference, to kind of summarize what you said, the difference is whether the people feel like they're pushing each other apart and they're kind of separating the people, or whether they feel that as a collective they came together to discuss it. Would that be a good kind of rephrasing of what you said? Yeah. More about the vibe. Yeah. Well, I'm hopefully going to give you something to help you define that vibe a little bit more. So the way that I like to think about it is these are the indicators of when we're leading up towards healthy or unhealthy conflict, and the things that you can look at on the horizon to give you an indication if it's happening. So if you go into a conflict and there are misaligned goals or outcomes, you're probably going to have an unhealthy conflict. If you've got two people who are debating something and trying to decide a path and a route to take, if the destination they've got in mind is different, it's probably going to lead to bad outcomes. If those people that are having the debate are lacking respect and trust for each other, it's probably going to lead to an unhealthy conflict. And if those people assume negative intent on the other person, it's probably going to lead to an unhealthy conflict. So what's an example of misaligned goals and outcomes? Who works in a consultancy? Why have none of you said sales versus engineering? You were all thinking it, you just didn't want to say it. Perfect. Okay, let's leave the contentious sales versus engineering. So speed versus quality. This is a really common one. Are we building this thing for now, or are we building it for the future? If we're building it for now because we're exploring a business arm that we're not sure if it's going to work or not, then maybe the quality dial needs to be lower than if we're building a medical device to measure vital signs during surgery. So speed versus quality is a great thing to debate. Lacking trust and respect, if you've got two teams that believe that the other people are not being honest and open about what's going on, that can lead to a lot of this kind of stuff. Negative intent, if you do not believe that the team's acting in good faith, then you're never going to have a healthy conflict, because how can you trust that the ideas they're putting forward are for the right reasons? So all of these things together, and hopefully this kind of gives a bit of context to Michelle's idea of vibe. In unhealthy conflict, people win. And in healthy conflict, ideas win. That's the big difference. If you leave a conflict and you go, oh, Jonathan won that debate, it's probably an unhealthy conflict. If you leave a discussion and you go, oh, Jonathan had the best idea and he won the debate, it's probably a healthy conflict. So that difference between the two is a really good indication on if it's going to be healthy or not. Does that all make sense so far? Yeah, any questions, comments, suggestions? No? Cool. Oh, yeah.
Just when you mentioned like positive or negative intent, it sounded a bit like the perception of that
matters as much as the reality is. Does that sound right to you?
Definitely. So very, very, very few people wake up in the morning going to work thinking, I'm going to do a shit job today. Very, very few people wake up in the morning, go to work and thinking, I'm going to screw Andrew over today. Some people do. But, to a first order approximation, it's zero. And so most of the time when you've got this issue with negative intent versus positive intent, it's not actual intent, it's assumed intent. And, as professionals, we should start from a place of assuming positive intent for the people we work with. And if you ever see that changing, or we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but a good indication of this, if you ever see somebody talking about another team and using the collective name of the team as opposed to an individual, it's an indication that something's wrong here. To give you an example, that's not what the business wants. The business doesn't want anything. The business is a piece of paper filed with ASIC. That piece of paper doesn't want anything. The people in the business might want something. If somebody says, that's what design wants. No. Design is just the name in an org chart somewhere. A human being wants something. And so often an indication of one of these bottom two going awry is when we hear people using terms like that, because they're starting to use the them and us kind of language. Cool. So, okay, we know what it is. We know the difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict. Why do we want more healthy conflict? What are the benefits of healthy conflict?
I think healthy conflict, if it's done right, it can foster growth within a team, gets people to explore new things, try new things, and maybe think of a problem in a way they wouldn't have thought about it previously.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Anybody else? I hope you got a pedometer on you so you can record.
I wish I did.
Yeah.
Well, when ideas win, people have ownership of it and they work more effectively, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a really, really powerful one. Has anybody heard of the term IKEA effect before? Yeah? So IKEA effect, they did an experiment where they basically had a bunch of people build IKEA furniture. They then asked those people to value that furniture in dollars. Those people left the room, another group of people came in and valued the same furniture in dollars. So you had two groups of people, one who had built the furniture and then valued it, and another group who had just valued it. The group that built it and valued it consistently value it 20% higher than the group that had not built it. This tells us something really intrinsic about humans. We disproportionately weight the value of the things in which we've been the creators. So if we are involved in something, we value it higher. And so the opposite is also true. If we don't feel involved in a decision, we don't value the decision. I knew it was going to go wrong. It was the bad idea from the start. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to try hard because it's the bad idea. So you end up with these self-fulfilling prophecies where people who don't feel like they're involved in a decision don't buy into that decision, and so things fail anyway. So that's a really powerful point. One more.
So teams can actually work on problems that don't have a perfect solution.
Yeah, tell me more.
So, a lot of the choices we make, multiple products could probably solve the thing, multiple ways of doing it, multiple patterns could probably solve the thing, and everyone's going to always have an opinion. But being able to work through it with a conflict and actually get to an answer that everyone can live with, if not agree on, is the most important thing.
Yeah, so often the decision is not clear, and so we have to potentially disagree and commit to something. You might not think it's the best idea, but we have to do something. Often we can end up in these cycles where we don't make decisions because we don't want to make a wrong decision, and so we kind of default into the decision of no decision. And so often making a decision and moving forward is more important than just status quo. Here are some more. So yeah, improve problem solving. We said that enhances team cohesion, encourages accountability, fosters innovation. We mentioned that. So breaks down silos. That's what I mentioned earlier around, if you've got these people that are referencing teams as collective nouns as opposed to individuals, if that often happens because the decisions are not clear and the conflicts and the debates happen in silos. If you have those conflicts and debates together and break down those silos, then you don't end up with that language kind of happening. It also increases resilience and adaptation to change. If you're in a place where you've got constant debate, constant ideas happening, constant back and forth, then when things change, people are used to the idea that we're going to debate this, we're going to discuss it, and it's not the end of the world. Cool. Okay. So something I want to discuss here is, okay, this is all great theory. In the moment, when your emotions are high, when everybody else's emotions are high, how do we actually know if we're in a healthy or unhealthy conflict? In the moment. The two words I want you to think about are safe dialogue. Safe dialogue. Both of these words are incredibly important. Dialogue is pretty obvious. Dialogue means not a monologue. It means more than one person talking. If one person is talking, it's not a healthy conflict. Easy. Safe, psychologically safe. What does psychologically safe mean? It doesn't mean we wrap everybody in cotton wool. It doesn't mean we don't hurt anybody's feelings because their idea isn't the best idea. We actually want to have debates. We want to discuss this stuff, but we want to do it in a way where people feel like they can put their ideas forward, and those ideas are assessed for the merit of their ideas, not because of who said them. If an idea that a junior brings forward is dismissed because they're a junior, it's not a psychologically safe environment. The idea might be objectively not a good idea, but it should be assessed based on its merit, not the person who said it. It's easy to recognize when monologue is happening versus dialogue, like just one person speaking. It's a bit harder to recognize when an environment isn't psychologically safe. And the two behavior patterns that people tend to fall into, they're often termed silence and violence. I don't like those terms. They're a bit too violent. And so the way that I like to think about it more is forcing dialogue and withdrawing dialogue to kind of fit with my ideas of safe dialogue. So what does forcing dialogue look like? Like physically, what does it look like? Shouting, being loud. Yeah, like I know more than you. I've been doing this for 20 years. Yeah, physically, like I'm talking kinematics here, like bodily kinematics. What could it look like? Moving forward, stepping into the discussion, moving towards the camera on Zoom, trying to get the power pose going on. That kind of stuff is a great indicator that somebody's trying to force dialogue. So if they're using words and discussions of power, or they're using body positions of power, it's a great kind of indication that they're trying to force dialogue. What does withdrawing dialogue look like? Sorry? Yeah. Just simply stopping talking. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're looking at your phone. I'm pretty sure you're not actually even in this conversation anymore.
It's when they turn to the second monitor and you can just see the side of their face. Yeah. Or even worse, they turn the camera off. Yeah, I'm just having my lunch. Sure. The other thing it can look like, if you're in person or you're seeing more of their body, like kinematically, it's crossed arms, leaning back. Like that's a really good indication. Somebody is literally physically withdrawing from the conversation. That's a really good indication. Who thinks that they're somebody who, when they're in a conflict, tends to be somebody who forces dialogue? Just rough. Who thinks they're somebody who withdraws dialogue? Okay. Who thinks they do both? Yeah. Most of us do both. And it tends to be a lot about the patterns of behavior, the power dynamics, the environment we find ourselves in, like the how much coffee we had at lunchtime. There's a lot of patterns of behavior. And so, it's really important that we look for this and we recognize it in ourselves and we recognize it. But if you identify as a leader and somebody who leads a team, it's also important that you kind of have this background thread that's happening constantly. Just if there's a conflict going on, you have a background thread to kind of go, oh, well, that person, it seems like they're starting to withdraw. That person, it seems like they're starting to force. And you kind of, in the moment can start recognizing and reacting to that kind of stuff. So if you self-identify as a leader, look at what you do, look at what other people do, and use that as a factor. So I have a terrible time remembering to take photos. And so my wife, who is my social media person, has started slipping this slide randomly into my slide decks to remind me to take a picture. So I'm just going to take a selfie if that's okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm just double checking. I'm just giving some... I just don't want anybody to not want it. So I can either talk about what we do in the moment, or I can talk about culturally how you kind of fix this stuff so that it doesn't occur in the first place. Hands up for let's talk about in the moment what you do to fix it. Okay, hands up for long-term culturally. Okay, we'll do long-term culturally then. Okay, so it comes back to this. If we're trying to fix long-term, why does healthy conflict occur, it comes back to this. It's really, what are those environments, what are those situations which cause this stuff to occur without you realizing that it's happening or realizing that it's coming up. So a really great example is misaligned goals. We can create misaligned goals without realizing. If, for example, you've got a career development matrix or a skills definition or position descriptions of a senior engineer that says something along the lines of, to be a senior engineer at X company, you have to lead the technical direction of a project. What have you just done? You've just created misaligned goals. Because if you're discussing what technical path to take on a project, you've now got anybody that aspires to be a senior trying to get you to choose their technology choice, not because it's the best technology choice, but it's the one that's going to give them the greatest chance for a promotion. And so there's all of these subtle things that can occur when you really break down what the incentives are in a team. So if you're looking culturally, thinking about your teams, thinking about how you can ensure these things don't arise, really look at your skills development matrices, your career development pathways, and ask what does this incentivize my teams to do, and how can that be misaligned with the goals of the company? Sometimes they're hard to eradicate. They just are. A lot of what we're doing is trading off what's best for the individual versus what's best for the team versus what's best for the company versus what's best for the users versus what's best for the investors. A lot of this stuff you are just going to end up with misaligned goals and outcomes, but do whatever you can to eradicate that stuff. And you can't eradicate it unless you find it out first. So what are the incentives that you're giving your team? Another example of incentives is I worked in a consultancy, and this consultancy had a bad problem with underestimating work. Completely unknown in the world of consultancy. That never happens. But what would happen when a project would start going over time would be that one engineer would come in and would rescue the project. They would work 80 hours to make sure the project got delivered on time. And the project will get delivered on time. Then what would happen is in the Friday lunchtime session, The CEO would bring this person out and he'd put his arm around them and go, well done, so-and-so, you rescued this project, well done, well done, well done. That was creating misaligned incentives. It was building an environment where the people that rescued projects were heroed in the organization. This person progressed quickly in the organization. They was put in front of the whole company and told how good a job they did. And so everybody that was thinking, okay, how do I get recognized? How do I get rewarded and, frankly, remunerated for the work that I do? Oh, I need to do what he's doing. So again, it doesn't have to be in your career development frameworks, your matrices. It can be just the behaviors that you reward as a company. Question? Sure. So the question was, in that scenario, what could the CEO have done differently? I mean, straight off, I would say you do not reward that person publicly. If that person did work a long time, that person did put in a lot of effort, and so they need recognition and reward, but I wouldn't do it publicly if I was the CEO. I would say, thank you, I'd maybe do it in the team, but I wouldn't publicize it to the entire 150-person consulting organization. I would also, when doing that, recognize that this is not the situation we want to get ourselves into. I would start off by saying, we have messed up as a company so that we had to get into this place. The problem we need to fix is why we got in here in the first place. That is where we're going to be putting time and effort and focus in. But having said all of that, thank you so and such for rescuing us. That's the way that I would phrase it. Lacking respect and trust. Like this is really, really hard. In the world of remote work, hybrid work, trust is really hard to build. And trust is built in little increments, but it's spent in huge drops. And it's all of these things we do working as professionals, working with each other, that builds trust. I love remote work. I've been doing remote work since 3 or 4 years before COVID. I will never go back in an office 5 days a week unless the office is at the bottom of my garden. That's just not happening. However, I do recognize that there's a lot of value in being in person. There's a reason why you're all physically here as opposed to a remote conference. There's value in being in person. And one of those values is the way that trust is built. Trust is built quicker in person. Another reason it's built quicker in person is because often in the remote world, we only speak to somebody when we want something from them. And we lose what I call non-transactional conversations. Those things that happen in transitional moments, in between meetings, walking to the coffee shop, walking to work, bumping into each other on the way to a meeting room. These transitional moments that breed these non-transactional conversations. These are the things that build trust and respect. And so, there's a whole thing we can do better as organizations to build these kinds of things into the way we work. I am not talking about mandated Friday afternoon fun time. That doesn't really work unless you already have a good foundation of trust and respect. I'm just talking about simple things like, hey, let's just turn up early, 5 minutes early for the meeting. Hey, let's just stay 5 minutes late. Let's book in an hour for the meeting, but only plan 30 minutes for the meeting and spend a little bit of time afterwards. Like just doing the little things. It doesn't have to be a lot. 5 minutes makes a big difference. The number of non-transactional conversations you have with somebody is a good indication of the trust that you have with them. Doesn't have to be about personal life. It just has to not be transactional. So there's the difference between the two is, if the only time you ever hear from me is when I want something from you, then every time you see my name, that's the first thought is, what does Andrew want? So it can literally just be just checking in with somebody. Hey, how are you going with so and such? Is there anything I can help with? Like trying to be helpful as opposed to transactional. It can just be as simple as that. And the last one, negative intent. Like we talked a lot about this earlier. I don't think I need to go on to that much more. But yeah, this is basically catching people's language and trying to encourage people to change the way they talk about something, to assume negative intent. Like if somebody the difference in the language is if somebody assumes a reason why somebody did something, just call them out on it. Say, how do you know that? Have you asked them? Just making sure that if people don't talk about assumed negative intent and calling that behavior out, and that's not what they said. They said this. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. So for those who didn't hear, the question there was if someone came to me and said the ops team won't let me deploy that, how would I kind of handle that situation? Well, I would say, first of all, who in the ops team? Let's talk about people, not teams. And secondly, why? Like, what's their reasoning? What justification did they give? What is their decision-making framework that makes them say no? Because they must have a decision-making framework, and if they don't, then that's actually the problem. And so, kind of digging into the who and the why and going deeper into that is how you get around this kind of stuff. And if you're, I'm not saying you would say this, but gaming this, if you said to me, "Oh, it's because it's because they don't like that I built it in Rust," you're like, okay, well, why do you think that? Where's your proof? It could be that you've just assumed that because you heard that one of them said they didn't like Rust and they want to build everything in Erlang or whatever. Don't do that. So if you're giving assumed behavior or assumed intent, like where's that come from? Why have they said that? So just digging into it more and trying to understand it. Often conflict, like this kind of stuff, is because we don't actually understand that person's point of view. And again, we're not debating ideas, we're debating people. Yeah, last question, because we are starting to run out of time.
So when we're talking about trying to understand the reasoning, sometimes it can be very aggressive. You're going to someone saying, "Hey, explain why." Right? How do you do that in such a way that you're not being accusatory or like you said, very forceful, right, in the conversation?
Sure. Help me understand. That's a really, really great phrase. Help me understand why this is the right decision. Because if you're going in there and you're assuming that they're wrong and you're assuming that you're right, that can lead to that kind of defensive behavior. If you go in there and go, look, I get that you're making this decision, I just don't understand. Like, can you help me understand why? Taking it from that point of view helps. Trying to be open to the fact you might not be right, and that helps massively. Cool. I do want to leave kind of time for generic kind of Q&A at the end, so we'll wrap up there. Anybody who wants to know about this other stuff, come see me afterwards and I'll share it with you. So thank you very much. If you want to know more about Tech Leaders Launchpad, scan that QR code. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, scan that QR code. I do a lot of fortnightly live streams. I did one last night on hiring juniors. I've got one coming up with Phil Hack in a couple of weeks' time and Scott Hanselman in about a month's time. And if you just want to have a chat with me about anything tech leadership, scan that middle QR code. Thank you very much. So we've got about 5 minutes for general Q&A.
Hello, great chat. Just wanted to say that the stuff that you've presented feels a bit more individualistic and probably actions that one can take on an individual basis, but what would you, is that more of like a lead by example, and do you have any sort of suggestions about building a culture by being a bit more influential, maybe not from an individual perspective?
Sure. So, at the end of the day, culture is the combination of individual actions that individuals take. And so if we want to change the culture of an organization, as individuals, we have to make changes in our behavior. if you're trying to think about this from an organizational point of view and how can we make more effective change, then really it's back to this. And it's back to asking those questions like, organizationally, how are we having misaligned goals? As an organization, do we need to do more things to build trust? So it's, kind of trying to elevate that question and look at the system and use systems thinking to go within this system of the organization. How are we doing this kind of stuff? But fundamentally, culture is individual actions kind of, rolled up over the entire team. Cool. Any other questions?
So most of us are developers first rather than people person first. So if you're going into like a bit of a fresh leadership type position and you don't know how to start these kind of conversations, what advice would you give to someone that's new to this kind of leadership role and not really knowing how to do the people side rather than the code side?
Sure. I want to challenge something you said first before I answer that. You said most of us are developers, not people. You're not, you're a people person. You work in a team, in an organization, there's people around you, there's your peers, there's your boss, there's your boss's boss, there's the people you work with, there's the customers that use your product. Understanding the human side of things is as much the job of an engineer as it is a leader. The focus, the time investment, the ratio, it changes as you change in your career, but spending time learning these skills, even as just an engineer, is hugely valuable, especially if you work in consulting. I mean, when I used to hire people for consultancies, if somebody came to me, and I know that I'm massively generalizing here, I'm just doing that to make a point. If you want to have a nuanced conversation afterwards, I'm happy to do that. But if say they were a 7 out of 10 in tech, but a 3 out of 10 in communication, I wouldn't hire them. But if they were a 3 out of 10 in tech and a 7 out of 10 in communication, I would. Because as a consultancy, those skills are more important. So just as a general point, I wouldn't kind of go, oh, those are the skills the managers need to learn. I don't need to learn them. It will do you well in your career to become better at them. And the fact you're asking that question means that, hopefully you see the value in that. To answer your actual question, how do you get into it? Finding safe spaces to practice this stuff is hard. Finding kind of low risk places to practice it is hard. I would have a conversation with your boss, your manager, somebody you feel like you can trust and say to them, I want to get better at this stuff. Can you help me? Can we practice this kind of stuff together? Often a lot of these skills, they feel like they're not learnable. They feel like they're kind of, you're either born a good public speaker or you're not. I have the first public talk that I ever did on my YouTube channel. Go look at it. It's not good. When I first started in public speaking, I watched everything back again, multiple times. Oh, that was bad. That was hard. But it made me better. When I first started learning to communicate and influence, when I started first doing sales as a job, as an engineer, sales as an engineer is this weird thing. It's really hard. But my boss, after every sales meeting, used to take me to the coffee shop and used to sit me down and used to say to me everything I did badly in that meeting and what I could do better. And after he did that for the 100th time, I started getting better at it. It's a skill. You can practice it. Yes, some people are born better, but you can still learn. You can and you can get better at it. It is just putting the time, putting the effort in, and making sure that you do it in safe spaces with people who you trust. Cool. All right, I think we're at the end.
We're at time, yep. So I'm sure Andrew will be hanging about for anyone else. But thank you again for your time today.